Hello and welcome to Journeys and Journals. I'm Bernie Martin Beck, and I get to talk to the most fascinating people about history. History of our community and how they got here and where they are now. And I've invited a friend from way back when. We were just saying in 1950. Well, let's ask him. Steve, when was it we met at San Francisco?
Well, that's an interesting situation. My life was really taking a dramatic turn about 1971, and I was leaving the Rogue Valley for the distant east, and I was traveling through San Francisco, and believe it or not, Bernie, our paths crossed. Our paths crossed in the San Francisco airport, fall of 1971.
Now, I knew that you were Steve, and you knew that I was Bernie.
Sure did.
Because our folks knew one another here in the Rogue Valley, right?
That's right.
Well, let's talk about your folks. Who are they and how did they get here?
Well, my folks grew up in the Midwest, but because of the circumstances surrounding the Second World War, they had ended up in Southern California, and then after World War II, they moved to Alaska.
I remember the Alaska part.
That was a big step for them.
Southern Cal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My dad and his brother and their wives drove to Alaska. Now you don't drive all the way to Alaska, but eventually you take a ferry. But they drove right up through California, right through here. On up into Washington, took a ferry on over, and that's where my brother and I came along. It was in Ketchikan, Alaska.
Oh, so you're not even a U.S.
Well, I don't think Alaska was a state quite yet at that point, but eventually they decided that they wanted to come back to the States, and
the lower 48
the lower
is their
48,
call.
that's right. And they could have gone anywhere, really, but they were impressed with this area. There was a school, a Christian school here, where they could put us two boys in school.
When you say two boys?
My brother, Richard, he was 3 years older than me.
And you guys were what age when you came?
Well, we arrived here in 1956, the early part of 1956. I was probably not quite 6 at that time. My brother was 3 years older.
So they had planned ahead to have you kids in school. And Grants Pass was a good place with a fine Christian school.
Certainly was.
I'm bragging a little because I went to school there too in the 1940s.
Yeah. In fact, the school was located right up here on 7th Street. I can't recall now just what the name of the school is that's located there now.
No, but it's a stone's throw from our Better Life TV.
Yes, that's correct. It's right up here in this area. And that's where I grew up, was right here in Grants Pass.
And let's look at a picture of your mom and dad. This guy, oh, there's your mom. She graduated from...
Yeah, she graduated from Wyandotte High School in Kansas City, Kansas. She was had a lot of abilities in secretarial lines, and when they arrived here in Grants Pass, she quickly got work as a secretary. My dad was more hands-on type of work.
And your dad wore so many hats, but let's look at this one with the sailor hat. He is just,
yes.
Was that before they were married?
That's correct. Kind of almost simultaneous there. I think that...
She fell in love with the sailor?
Well, their paths had crossed back in Kansas City, and then they reconnected in Southern California.
I have a sailor husband, so I had to put that in.
Yeah.
I
could tell you one thing about my dad. When he was on a ship, he was on a destroyer escort. And one night, he got up to go to the bathroom or something, but he was out on deck. And he stepped into the anchor hole and it wasn't covered up. It should have been covered up, but for some reason it was uncovered, and down he went. And if he had gone all the way down, he would have gone right out into the ocean. This was out at sea, and somehow he was able to reach out just in the nick of time and grab the edge of that anchor hole. Otherwise, I would never have, come along.
Of course not. Now, do you know the name of his ship?
The J.D. Blackwood.
Well,
As a
on
matter
the
of fact.
computer now, you can look up J.D.
Yes,
Blackwood and find when it was built, because
That's right.
Doug's looked up his ship.
Yeah.
You're the very, very first to have ever brought the computer to
Yeah.
sort of guide us through this. Pictures.
Yes.
Here's pictures of your dad.
Yeah.
Wouldn't he be surprised if he knew that he was being shown on the Better Life television?
That's right.
This wasn't even a dream of his, was it?
No. But there's a picture of them as they were traveling north to Alaska with
Wouldn't you
his
love to
brother
have
and-
that car?
Yeah. So I mean, it was a real adventure. My folks, particularly my dad, he was a very independent-minded individual and very adventurous. He was willing to try new things. To go to Alaska in those days, I would think was quite an ambitious undertaking.
For an LA kid, you bet.
But the interesting thing is that as my folks got to Alaska and began their family, their lives were dramatically changed.
How's that?
Well, their physician, Dr. Stagg, and his wife befriended them. They were not just a doctor, but a medical missionary, you might say. And they carried out the principles of the gospel in a very practical way. They were very friendly, and they helped my folks. They taught them the Bible. And
Said, come on over to church
yeah,
with me, huh?
That's right, they did. And they joined their church.
Hey.
Here's a beautiful picture of the folks that were part of that church. And here's Dr. and Mrs. Stagg over here on the right, and my folks over here on the left.
Now,
they
this
were
is
probably,
what part of Alaska?
This is Ketchikan, Alaska, southeastern.
Okay.
And it's not extremely cold there, but it's very wet. It's kind of like Washington State, only maybe,
More so.
More so, exactly.
Well, did they run out of gas here in Southern Oregon, or
I don't think so. You mean on their way back?
they just
Years later, they
decided that's
this is a beautiful, like the sign says, it's the climate.
There you go.
And it still is. It was an impressive community, I think.
Well, now your mother found work right away.
Yes, and my father, he had made a commitment to God. When they decided to come back to the States, he had pledged that he would work for 1 year as a call porter. A call porter sells Christian literature, like the bedtime stories, the Bible story, stories about Jesus, and he itinerated around Southern Oregon. In those days, he was teamed up with another call porter, another gentleman, and they traveled around visiting the communities and selling Christian literature.
Well, now, then you were how old by this time?
Well, I was about 6.
Oh, little kid.
Yeah, I was still small.
Missing Alaska, or just happy with a new
I
adventure?
didn't really think too much about Alaska in those days. But my folks, they were very ambitious, even in Alaska. I mean, they built a home, and this is a picture of them on that particular site. It was very rugged terrain, and my brother and me,
there's your brother.
we grew up. They carved out a spot out of the hill where they put a garage. A garage was moved and put in this location.
And that was home?
Interesting. Yeah, that was home in Alaska.
I'm cold just thinking about that. Now, who's this kid?
Now that is me at about the age of 2.
Okay, the Alaskan
Yeah,
born.
this was in Alaska. Now here, Bernie, the story unfolds down here. This is a duplex that was located on 804 Southeast 8th Street.
Okay.
Right down, not too far from the downtown area. And that's where we after we moved from the Green Acres Motel, this is where we ended up, in this duplex. And
I don't remember the name of the motel Doug started out in, but
yeah.
probably pretty much the same. You
And
come to town and you
my dad had difficulties getting work because he was determined to be faithful to his religious convictions, and there was a conflict. He wanted to keep the Bible Sabbath.
Okay.
And he was not able to get work and maintain those convictions. So what he did was he began to sell fruit at a fruit stand.
Oh boy.
And this fruit stand was located across the street from the farmer's market. In fact, the tree that this fruit stand was under, it was in a tent. There's a tree that is still there to this day. This property was owned by the McFarlands. And as far as I know, they still own the property, on both sides of the street there, Rogue River Highway. And they've never cut that tree down. And the farmer's market, I have a picture of my dad here in his store. He eventually moved across the street into this building. The building is still there. It's been embellished through the years. But in that store, the farmer's market.
And then they put nice sheetrock
right.
around it, or they
exactly. But the building is still in there, and that was Cook's Specialty Foods, about 1960, 61, 62, and there my dad is. He would bake things, and he was very
well, you've got
practical.
A couple of careers that your dad had, because I know he was a
He did heating and air conditioning.
That's what I was trying to say.
Right.
But he also was a school principal.
That's a fascinating story, because he was very active in his church, and he was the school board chairman. And something happened at the school. The principal had to be relieved of his responsibilities, and so they were out of a teacher in the middle of the school year. You don't just go out and get a teacher. And so my dad
with an education of what?
High school.
Oh, he was?
He stepped into that position, and he did a remarkable job.
You know, it's that kind of story that makes me so excited about your dad, because I guess I knew him as wearing a dozen hats.
Yes.
He wasn't the least...
He was a man of many talents.
Well, it was a holiday. Maybe it was Christmas Day, and the furnace went out. I think maybe it had been a flood day, and your dad says, "Oh, I'll come in and fix it." Well, it wasn't an oil, it was an oil stove, and he did gas, or vice versa. Mm-hmm. I think he stayed for 8 or 9 hours. Aye. And at the end, he said, "I'm sorry, I just can't do it." And we felt bad, because he would rather have been home with the little boys. Speaking of little boys, let's look at you and your brother. They're just the cutest little couple of kids.
Sure.
We're talking what year?
Well, about this time, I was probably about 12. My brother was 15. And this was a time in our lives when tragedy struck our family. It was 1962. My folks had moved into a home not far from the farmer's market, my dad's place of business at that time, up on Drury Lane. And I was coming home with my mom from her work. And I had put my bicycle in the back of her car, and we were doing the laundry at a laundromat. We didn't own a washing machine in those days. That's how limited we were in our resources. But I was sitting in the laundromat, and suddenly a lady burst into the laundromat. And she said, "Dorothy, your house is up in flames." And the first thing I thought of was I had left my dog tied up in the house. So I ran out to the car, pulled my bike out, and pedaled across the bridge. There was only one bridge in Grants Pass in those days, and pedaled as hard as I could for home. And when I got there, the place was just going up in flames. Yeah. It was engulfed. And unfortunately, they did not get my dog, Pepper, out of that house. So that was the thing that really broke me up. Of course, my folks were devastated too.
Yeah. Probably.
What do you do? I mean, we lost everything, virtually everything. We still had some things in the barn, but for all practical purposes, your slate is wiped clean, and you start over.
Yeah, it's even remarkable you had these few pictures, and that they're on the computer.
I think they were probably in the barn,
And somebody said, come over to our house?
Our church family was wonderful.
You mentioned the Lewises.
Yes, Floyd and Vella Lewis.
Oh.
I was best friends with their grandson, Alan Fowler. And they just opened up one of their homes. They had a home out on the, close to the fairgrounds. It's no longer there, but you can see a picture of it here. And my brother and me there that summer, they let us stay there. Desi Lewis, Floyd's sister, I believe.
Sister-in-law.
Sister-in-law, that's right.
She went on to be a missionary to Arizona, to the Indian reservation.
Isn't that amazing?
After she was 75 or something like that. A nurse who probably catched a lot of us kids coming out through the birth canals.
Yeah, so
she was incredible.
But we stayed in her home before we moved into the Lewis's extra home.
Well, now, that was one tragedy. I mean, that's you and your brother and mother and father survived it.
Yes, yes.
Tragedy number 2.
You can always buy more stuff if you need it. But that very summer, we were blessed. The church rallied around us, our friends, and they helped us. We decided to rebuild on that particular spot, the same spot right there on Drury Lane. And all summer long, there's some pictures of it here. My folks were working, as well as Olin Nations and his brother Bob were working on this house and building it. And we were just about ready to move in. It was a hot summer afternoon, and I was at home with my mom. She worked for the county extension agency at that time.
Oh, yeah.
As a secretary, and this was fair season. This was the time of the county fair. And we were getting ready to go to the fair that night. We were going to go as a family. The phone rang. And it was my dad. He wanted to talk to my mom. And I could tell, I was only 12 years old at the time, I could tell that she was distressed. She said something that I'll never forget. She said, "We're not going to lose him, are we?" Even at the age of 12, you don't forget words like that. You sense that those words are serious. And I knew something terrible was wrong. My brother had been hurt in a swimming accident.
Well, I know more about that swimming accident because the Nations boys, the little Nations boys, were swimming with your brother.
That's right.
In the big irrigation ditch.
Well, it probably looked big to them, but as I've looked at it, it wasn't that big.
Probably not 3 foot deep.
And somebody, as I heard the account, dared my brother to dive in. Now, you weren't supposed to even be swimming up there, I guess, but he took that dare and he dove in and he didn't come up.
And that was the saddest day. It makes the house fire look little.
If his friend Wayne had not gone in and brought him out, he wouldn't have lived. But he had broken his neck. They took him to Medford. An ambulance came and took him to Medford, and there he passed away that night.
Yeah, sad, and we're so acquainted with grief when we lose a sibling or a child at such an early age. Now I want to hear that everything went rosy, and your family smooth sailed on in. It
just seemed like, spiritually speaking, my life just went down. you know, my folks, it seemed like they had experienced so much grief and heartache that year, but I got interested in music. I was getting into my teenage years.
Oh, and you're a good musician.
And, well,
yeah, look at this.
Yeah, that, you know, I actually taught guitar for a time down here at the music shop.
Okay.
In Grants Pass.
And you had the hair to go with it.
Yeah, this picture that you're seeing here is going to reflect that. In fact, it was taken at the music shop.
And you were very good. Let's face it.
Well, I don't know how about that, Bernie, but I was, you know, I was interested in the drums. I was interested in the guitar. And
did you dream of going big time?
oh yeah, sure. Everybody did that played music in those days. But you know,
you were all going to be discovered.
Yeah, right. But praise God, He discovered me. He found me in a college town right here in Southern Oregon, Ashland, Oregon. That's where my life was changed. We don't have time to go into that story, but in a dramatic way, my life took a 180-degree turn. I came home, I gave up the drugs, I gave up the alcohol, I gave up the other stuff, the cigarettes. My life was just dramatically changed, Bernie. I can't state it. I don't want to overdo it, but I don't want to underdo it either.
Well, I know that your folks had lost one son and felt that there was real danger they'd lose their others to a different death, a different tragedy, a different heartache.
You know, I have become a Christian minister now.
Long way from back there.
Yes, and every time I have the opportunity, I give my testimony, and I attribute my change of life to the grace of God, but because my parents were asking in my behalf. They were asking for me.
Oh, and did they ever? I mean, your father, as I said, he was willing to give up everything for you. I mean, that's comes love. That's Christ-like love.
I tell you what, I remember my dad talking to us about, about my brother's death and how he would gladly have crawled up on that table, and taken the place of my brother.
Well, I believe it. I believe it's true.
That's a father's love.
Yeah, something wonderful has happened. Because I don't know, your dad lived until 2004 or something like that?
In 1996, my mother had cancer, and that's when she passed away. And my wife and I were living in the Midwest at the time and felt like we wanted to get closer to my folks. And so in the providence of God, we felt that it was, we were able to move out here. And I don't have the time to go into all the details, but my father, after my mom passed away, he became very active in the community services right here in Grants Pass.
Some people might know it as Dorcas Society.
That's right.
That's people who help with food and clothes for the needy.
That's right. He loved it, and he ministered to many, many people.
Now this is a man that by his 78th year or what?
That's right.
His arthritis had crippled him till the hands looked like.
Oh, they were very, very deformed. He suffered with that for years. But he was very strong-minded, and
so he'd shake
he kept
your
at
hand.
it. That's right.
I mean, he worked like crazy, but with these, it was incredible. And I just was talking to others about your dad before this show, and he had a sense of humor that you kind of didn't know if. Oh no, not you again! And then you'd embrace him, and he'd just purr like a kitten.
Yeah, he had a way of connecting with people. Years later, those kids that were his students, they came to, I think it was the 40th or 50th anniversary of the school or something like that, and they just reflected how appreciative they were of those days when my dad was their teacher many years ago.
Well, you have a fine heritage, lots of bumps in life. Where are you going now?
Well, my wife and I live here in Grants Pass in that same home that was rebuilt.
And the barn's still there?
And the barn is still there, absolutely. That's a sequel to this account, but yes. And we're ministering here in the state of Oregon. We share the love of Jesus.
And thanks for this picture when your mom and dad were with you and
Yes.
your wife. Her name is?
My wife's name is Alberta.
And Alberta, well, she came out west.
She grew up in Massachusetts. We met in Georgia, and we have ministered. We ministered in Mexico. There's a picture of that here. My dad actually got to come down to Mexico for a period of time with us.
I'll bet
He loved it.
I
He loved
bet
every minute of it.
He could make anything out of, something good out of everything that
Yes.
I ever heard of. You say, well, there are miracle-working people, but he had an eye for it. He could take the worst situation and really bring joy. And he probably has to many of the people who are watching. And if you'd like to tell this little boy stories about his dad, you just write them out, send them to Better Life Television. Now, your dad's name is?
Dale Cook.
And your mother?
Dorothy Cook.
And your brother's name is?
Richard.
And you are?
I'm Steve.
If you have stories about any of them, please write them down. You'll put them in his computer, and there will be to share forever.
That's right.
Thank you so much for being my guest.
It's my pleasure, Bernie.
I still see you as
Very
a little
much so.
kid.
Yes.
I was all grown up when these kids came along, and we are so glad that you stayed. I'm Bernie Martin Beck saying thank you so much for tuning in to Journeys and Journals. We'll walk this trip together.
Right.